Good morning, everyone, and welcome to yet another Peninsula webcast. We're joined here today by myself, Niall Donnelly. I am a business sales partner and mentor here at Peninsula Ireland. My role is to reach out to businesses across the country and HR professionals and keep them up to date with different legislation changes and recommend ways in which they can streamline their business in terms of both employment law and health and safety. We're joined, of course, by Moira Grassick, our COO. How are you doing today, Moira?
Good, thank you.
Looking forward to this one?
Yeah, this is probably one of our newest pieces of legislation, so it's still evolving, so it's exciting.
It is.
Yeah.
And we'll go through this kind of, the legislation coming in. There is some kind of, black and white stipulations around it, but there is a very grey area as well, and we're kind of figuring things out on a case-by-case basis as they're kind of coming in. So it's an exciting topic. I've been dealing with it a lot downstairs. Just to go quickly through the agenda here of the day, folks. So we're going to be touching on your responsibility as an employer in relation to remote working, the risks associated with remote working and the new legislation that's coming in, policies and procedures, kind of best code of practice moving forward, performance monitoring, and then of course we will be getting some questions at the end that you guys can submit into the chat there, depending on time, but we usually get a couple of in anyway. As always as well, I will be, myself and some of the team downstairs will be reaching out to people on this webcast for a complimentary one-to-one business review. It's complimentary for attending the webcast here this morning. As we will get into, and as we kind of briefly touched on there is new legislation coming in, but we are kind of figuring this out as we go. So I would really recommend availing of this complimentary review and making sure that you have your documentation and your policies are up to date and watertight is key. And even if you do have a kind of policy in place, the review is recommended just to make sure that you're completely as secured as possible moving into the rest of the year, and this new legislation changing as we deal with the cases coming in. But for the minute, I will pass you over to Moira. Take it away.
Great, thanks, Niall. So guys, today we're obviously looking at the remote working, and as I said there to Niall, this is one of our newest pieces of legislation. We're expecting some further update around the code, hopefully next week at some point in time. But we're probably pretty clear about the legislation itself and what that looks like, and the code is really, I suppose, going to cement the, I suppose, how we're going to implement it exactly. So we've been a long time waiting on it, so we're hoping that that's going to come out next week. We've been told it will be, but these things changes as well. So as Niall says, today we're going to look at some of the responsibilities from the employer's perspective to remote working, risks associated with it, policies and procedures, and around kind of performance management, performance monitoring, and that type of thing. But I suppose first of all, I just want to kick off in relation to remote working and what exactly remote working is. So ultimately, remote working refers to any work that's undertaken that it's not in the normal work premises, and that can include a domestic setting or a remote working hub. So what we have seen over the last couple of years, where a number of businesses have moved to a remote working model, is that people either work from home, or there may be a particular area in their town, village, etc., like that has now become a remote hub, and that people are working from there. But what the thing to really remember is ultimately it's an extension of the workplace. So regardless of the fact that they may not be in your primary place of work, it doesn't mean that any of the terms, conditions, any of the regulations don't apply to them. And that's one of the things that makes the remote working piece quite difficult to manage from an employer's perspective. I'm thinking of all of the risks that are associated with that as well. So let's have a look at your responsibility from an employer's perspective. So ultimately, the employer is responsible for ensuring that the employees are in a safe environment. They also need to make sure that anything that may be applicable to them within the workplace is the same as what it would be if they're working remotely. We have seen a number of different requests in relation to remote working, and what I think it's really important that you're aware of is that even though an employee may request remote working, doesn't necessarily mean that they're entitled to remote working. However, there are certain things that you need to look at in relation to that. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. The remote working element of it came into play in relation to the Work-Life Balance and Miscellaneous Provision Act that came into play last year. And there was a few different elements in relation to it, and the remote working is one of them. However, around people with medical care, carers leave, that sort of stuff, etc., has already been implemented. And this, what that we're expecting next week, I suppose, is the wider element in relation to employees that may not be impacted by things around the carers piece or the parental piece. It's kind of your majority of your employee setting. So just before we kick off, I suppose now we're just going to look at a quick poll.
Yeah, and I guess it's the question of the day coming into the new legislation of the right to request it. But have you had an employee request to work remotely in your business? So obviously, this whole conversation kind of came up around the pandemic and COVID, and in the past few years, it was like even 3 or 4 years ago, this was quite, an obscure topic, and obviously has come to the forefront, but it's getting more and more traction now, especially as it is coming into legislation. People can see it on social media, and it can be quite a attractive prospect for employees. So, I think we are seeing more and more people request, and we will be seeing more and more people request, as this comes through in the next week or so. So see the responses there. So wow, and 82% of people have had an employee request, and 18% haven't. It'd be interesting to see more how that 82% of requesting kind of went, how people kind of managed it, and then they fully realized, what they're taking on then with that, rather than just being you can work from home, or the kind of ins and outs of how it actually goes on. As you said, like, working from home is an extension of the workplace in all respects.
Well, I was going to cover a few little things now as we just move through today's webcast, but I suppose a few things to note. And what we're definitely seeing is that there was, obviously, as we know, there was a lot of remote working happened during COVID. Some of those scenarios still remain in place. So it's kind of become custom and practice more than anything else. So there hasn't been a full review of what way that working relationship really is. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. I think the other thing is that we've kind of seen this year, particularly towards the back end of last year, kind of more of a shift to have like a hybrid system. So there's a lot more people looking for people to come back into the office, either on a hybrid model or on a full-time basis. So I think over time we'll see those requests for remote working increase over the next particularly over the next couple of weeks, I think. But even at that point, if you are an employer and you're looking to bring back your staff into probably more of a structured environment, it's a really good time to start looking at that now at the beginning of the year, and how you're going to address that and how you're going to approach it. So I'm just going to move on to some of the risks with the remote working piece of it. And ultimately, it's the employer's responsibility to provide a safe place to work. And that's really important, that the employees are fully aware of what type of elements that they need to be looking at in relation to it. So things that they need to be doing is looking at any sort of things about risk assessments, for example, some sort of ergonomics review on the area that they're actually particularly in, what controls, what safeguards that you actually have in place. So these are all of the employer's responsibility. You're basically obliged to do whatever you can to prevent any injury or ill health that might reasonably arise while the employee is working from home. So it's quite a health and safety focus from this element. There are other pieces that I'm going to touch on in a second, but overall, the health and safety is probably your first starting point, that you really need to look and say, okay, my employees working from home, have I looked at risk assessments? Have I assessed their working environment? Do they know what type of setup they have? All of those pieces need to be reviewed as part of the remote working. Important to note that remote working requests at the moment, from what we know and what the legislation says, is the employee needs to be working with you for 6 months. And if they want to make a request for remote working, they should give you 8 weeks notice of the date that they wish to start. And then you've got 4 weeks to respond. So there is a bit of a timeline in order for you to be able to look at different elements about whether or not you can facilitate the remote working. When the code of practice comes out, it'll obviously be a little bit more clearer about other things that you can actually look at. But for the moment, there is a right there for the employee to currently request that remote working. That's there. Okay, so the other things that we need to look at in relation to it is sort of the assessment and hazards. So basically the working environment that we've touched on, the workstations, including the display screen units, DSE and work equipment. I think when we all originally moved back home, bits and bobs were taken. If there hasn't been an opportunity to look and see what that setup was like. So are they working from a laptop? Have they got screens on the house? Have they got a proper working area? That needs to be all assessed. The employee health and welfare, including sensitive risks and those with disabilities. So if it's a case that you've got an employee, for example, that may have some sort of disability, that may need some extra support, we need to make sure that we're identifying those situations as well and seeing if we need to put in some arrangements around making sure that we're facilitating that. Okay, so we do need to arrangements for any sort of any reporting in relation to any difficulties the person may have. So for example, if there's stress, any sort of faulty equipment, arrangements for consulting with an employee. So what type of consultation is actually happening, and then looking at reporting any accidents. So for example, if they trip over a cable, where does the responsibility lie? And I know Niall and I will talk about this earlier on. So it is important that you have a reporting mechanism in place, that you can understand what happens if there's any sort of an accident. The lone workers piece will basically fall underneath this, because you can have situations where people are working on their own. So how are we going to make sure that that person is okay doing alone working? So looking at risk assessments, etc., like that is really important for that piece.
And you're also, relying on a certain level of self-assessment there from the employee. Obviously in a work environment, in an office, say, or more traditional work environment, that they could be more easily monitored. But to this, it's almost more important to make sure that you have all your risk assessments done, you have everything completely up to scratch and watertight there, just to completely, get rid of any possibility, or as much as you can, at least, of accidents or issues in the home then.
Yeah, and I suppose we've looked at some of the health and safety side of things now, but I think it's important that we know there's other risks associated with things. So one of the major risks, and something that is definitely becoming to the forefront more, is all around data breaches, around cyber security. So obviously, if somebody's working from home and they're not on a mainframe within a business, the risk to a cyber attack is much greater, because the security levels are normally less. And depending on your business type, that can have a detrimental effect on your business. So that's really important that you're clear about what that looks like, whether or not somebody needs to log on through a VPN, or how that process actually works. That's a high risk. Who actually has access to the person's laptop, or who has access to the room where they're working? Because if there's confidential files or information that may be accessible by other people, it's important that the employer knows that, and you put in any sort of processes to mitigate that risk and what that will look like, because what you don't want is to have a data breach that may impact on a client, for example, if there's confidential information at home. The other thing that has come up a few times with us is in relation to where the employee is actually located. So if it's a case that the employee is working within Ireland and that has been agreed with the employee, or that can be fine. But if you've agreed with your employee that they can work outside of the state in another country, for example, for a period of time, that may have a bigger impact both on you and the employee, from a corporate tax presence, for example, in a different country, or different tax elements that may have a bigger impact on the business overall. So it's really important that you're clear about allowing the employee to work from a particular area, that it's not, I can go and sit by the beach in the Caribbean for a few weeks and enjoy myself. You need to make sure that there's clear perimeters around that. And we've had a few cases that have come through over the last little while about people that are working outside of the state, and that can pose real difficulty for people. The other risk obviously is in relation to communication and in relation to team work and performance and all of those type of things. That it's really important that you have a structure around how all of that is going to work. So there's loads of elements to think about when you're talking about remote working and looking what's best for the business as well. So it is a complex area, and I think it's going to get more complicated as time goes on. Okay, so time for another poll.
So have you implemented a policy around remote work? And then you'll be able to, so yes, no, and not yet, I need one. Yeah, as you said there, Moira, it is a complicated topic, and especially because it is a relatively new concept for us, and definitely new legislation now. There's kind of, taking it on a case-by-case basis. A lot of it is almost kind of shooting in the dark to some degree until, a precedent is set up. But, as you said there, trying to think of everything as it is, and literal extension of the workplace is probably the best place to begin.
Yeah, and look, and I think remote working can obviously have its benefits as well. And, we're looking for more work-life balance, and people are looking to try and work in a way that facilitates their particular lifestyle. But it's really important that you get that balance, and having that policy on what that looks like. So there's clear parameters set down. It's really beneficial, not only from an employer's perspective, but also from an employee's perspective. So things that you should be looking at including in it is, like, is there core hours? Is there core set times that you expect somebody to be online for? Is there break times that are set, or is a freedom there to come in and come out? And that means that there needs to be communication. So do they let you know when they're going on lunch, going on breaks? All of those type of things need to be looked at, and that would all be included in your remote working policy so that there's a clear parameter set on it.
And also, as you said there about communication, obviously most of what we're going into here so far is about, once the request has come through and you've agreed to let the employee work from home, how to manage it then. But, if a request comes through and you're not going to allow the employee to work from home, then how to, navigate what the reason that you have to have in place needs to be a good one, how to let them down easy, because that can cause loss of morale and everything around the office. So communication, as we kind of touched on in a few of these webcasts now, is key across the board.
Yeah, I also think now that it's important that you're clear in your rationale about it. And look, remote working isn't going to work for everybody. So, in the leisure industry, in the hospitality industry, 99% of those jobs have to be done on site, so remote working isn't going to work for them. But things like office work, for example, strong possibility that they can do remote working. But if it doesn't work for your business, you need to really explain to the employee why it doesn't work for your business. There has to be different reasons and rationale behind it. And some of it could be around team dynamics, working together, what's required, and, in relation to trying to create an atmosphere, people work off each other, people share knowledge. So there's loads of different reasons, but you just need to be clear in your own mind what works for your business.
Absolutely. I don't think there's a good few people that I know personally who would delighted to get back into the office after kind of COVID and everything kind of settled down, and whether it be full time back in the office now or that hybrid model.
Yeah.
So we have the results in. So 55% of people do have a policy around remote work at home. Again, whether this needs to be looked at again, just with the new official legislation coming in. 20% no, and 25% say not yet. I need one. As you said, not every industry was going to be hugely affected by this, but if you're on this webinar, you probably will be affected by this, or at least open to it. So the 20% that said no, I would suggest having a look at getting something in place.
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly now when the code is going to come in the next few days, that's really important that there's something there already, because I suspect that you may get a few applicants when it comes through. So looking at policies and procedures, just moving on to it. So really what we're trying to do is look at developing a procedure that works for you. So develop a clear procedures for managing this type of request. So as I said, the legislation has set out the timeframes in relation to it. So that obviously piece is quite clear at the moment. But how are you going to evaluate it? How are you going to assess it? If you've got a team of 5, are you going to let everybody work remotely? Are you only going to let a certain proportion? Are you going to look at a hot desk and type of things? All of those type of stuff need to be looked at. You need to look at negotiating with an employee. So if it's the case that you agree to remote working, what does that look like? Is it 1 day a week? Is it 2 days a week? What type of structure do you want to put on it? And communicating effectively to the employees. So that's really important. What we kind of seen is that at this point in time, in 2 years down from remote working for everybody, we've seen that people are trying now to put more of a structure in place, make it more streamlined, and that everybody is kind of working the same direction. Before, we kind of people coming in, going out, and there was no formal structure on things, but we're now moving to a side that we want that formal structure, I want all that together. So those type of things all need to be included in your policies and your procedures about it. And one of the things I think is really good is that you probably should look at a review period in relation to it, so that it doesn't mean that you're tied to it for a long period of time, because that's important, because if the first time you've ever done it, you don't know if it's really going to work. Like I think for most businesses, they made it work during the pandemic, but everybody was in the same boat. Now it's slightly different, that we're in a different environment yet again. But I think some other things that we need to look at and need to talk about is around the contract of employment. So does that need to be updated? So that needs to be reviewed alongside it. So the terms and conditions, the place of work may need to change, the hours that are working may need to change. So there's loads of different pieces to look at besides just that piece, that policy. It does flow back into that contract, because that's what you want to look back at, that there is clear engagement in relation to what that looks like. Okay, I think what the code is expected to look at is that it's going to look at both the needs of the business and the needs of the employee and trying to balance that out. So we always talk about this across legislation. The majority of legislation, for example, the Organisation of Working Time Act, when it comes to annual leave, it talks about trying to balance up the needs of both from family perspective, and it's probably going to be something similar here, but we might be surprised there may be some new things in it that we're not thinking about. So as I said, we should have a policy and a procedure in place at the moment around the remote working that will probably need to be reviewed and updated once it's been published by the WRC for the Code of Practice, which we're expected to be released next week on the 31st of January. It may be a day or two either side, but look, we'll obviously send out the information once we have it here. We've got sight of it ourselves as well. We'll keep all our clients updated on it. Okay. One of the last areas I just want to touch on is in relation to, I suppose, performance, where we have monitoring, but probably performance management, engagement, all of those type of things. So some of the stuff that we really need to put in place is make sure that you're having regular check-ins, which is really important, so that you're checking in with your team member, you know what's happening, you know what's going on, you know what the plan is for the day, and that you're setting key goals in relation to it as well. We've all seen the ads around a dog running around with the mouse, and we've all seen, to make sure that the screen is still moving and somebody doing their ironing and all that sort of stuff. The majority of employees want this to work as well, and want to make sure that they're engaging with their employer and they want to progress within their careers. So it's just making sure that you have a process around making sure that that performance is being reviewed and kept up to date, and that the output is meeting the requirements of what is needed for the job to be done. One thing that's really important is one-to-one meetings. So you have those set up, that you're taking the time to meet with your employee, that you're going through the same way as what you would if they were face-to-face, their goals, their KPIs, what all that looks like, and that you're given that feedback and areas of improvement that may need to happen. And if there's something not working with the remote working piece of it, don't be afraid to bring it up. Discuss it with them, say, that you don't think it's working for X, Y, and Z, and look at what you can do to adjust it. So that's important to happen as well. I mentioned earlier on the core working period. So, look, I suppose traditionally we're all Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 or 9 to 5 in offices. That has changed over time. So individuals may want to work different hours. So for example, they may want to drop children to school and come back and work from 10 to 2, pick up the children and then come back online at 4 o'clock. If that works for your business, that's fine. This is your call to make, but it needs to be clearly laid out what that looks like. So there is no ambiguity from either side, because that's where the complications start. The other area, obviously, it's set expectations. So you have a clear expectations on what you expect that person to do during those core working periods of time. So if it's a set piece of work or a set project, most people know what tasks they need to get done. Other element, obviously, providing feedback. So I think that's really important, that you're providing feedback so that everybody knows what's happening from a two-way perspective. The other area is face-to-face time, and I think sometimes this can go away, and I'm sure from talking to all our colleagues, the face-to-face is really important, and spending time from a face-to-face perspective is so beneficial. Like even when we go and meet our clients, etc., like lots of them like us to meet them face-to-face, because it's very easy to build that connection, much easier than it is over a VC. So
absolutely.
And I think even
on you guys, I was just going to say, I think even especially with those few years of everyone getting used to Zoom and this kind of thing, most people prefer to have that connection, do face to face. So try and get that in, even whether it be coming into the office and having that kind of hybrid time, and also that keeps the culture going in the office, and keeps morale up and keeps productivity up, and it leads into everything. You don't want people to be fully working from home feeling that they're left behind, as it were. Keeping that communication is key.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, and that leads really nicely onto the team meetings piece. So it is important that you have your team meetings or your department meetings, and some of them should be done face to face. And that is for that teamwork, that performance work between people, that team dynamics. Like what you don't want is because somebody's working from home that they don't feel that they're part of a team, that they're not contributing the same. That can lead to other problems as well, such as different claims, grievances, all that sort of stuff. And we have seen an uptake in relation to grievances from people that feel they're not being brought into things because they're not based in an office. So it's important that you have those face-to-face team meetings there as well. So look, we're obviously coming to a close. We're going to do some questions here, but I think in a summary, Niall, really important, a few things that you get a policy in place, that it's quite clear on that policy what your process and procedure is around it, that your managers or your department heads, whatever structure you have in place, are clear on what that policy looks like, rolled out to employees. It will need to be adjusted probably over the next couple of weeks when we get more clarity around the code of practice. It will be open to all employees over the next little while. So anybody with 6 months service will be able to make this application. Depending on your business, you may have quite a few that come in over the next couple of months. So in your own mind, people should start thinking now whether or not that will be able to facilitate it and what that will look like. Then step back and have a look at the risks associated with it. So those health and safety risks, really important. So what your expectation is from an employee's perspective. And from a cost perspective, Niall, so are you going to have to provide loads of extra equipment to employees to remote work? And those things will all need to be answered. And the other thing, obviously, is in relation to that performance and how you're going to manage that performance while somebody's working from home, and how you're going to manage that output and look at that productivity piece. So
Absolutely.
It's definitely an area to keep watching, because I think we're going to have loads of questions over the next couple of weeks on it.
As you said, this is only newly coming in now, and the landscape when it first came in versus now was completely different. So it's not even just something that doing up your policies and documentation as the once off now. It will be a different world in a couple of weeks or a couple of months. So having a consistent advice, people to turn to, as I said, our advice lines are hopping here with queries around this. It is really important in this as it kind of shifts moving forward. All right, guys, I think we have time for a couple of questions. There's a few that have been sent in here. Let me see. If a staff member has requested to remote work, but I want to refuse it, how would I go about doing that? And kind of briefly touched on this, not so much the process of it, but having to kind of manage it delicately, or having the proper reasons.
Yeah, and look, I mean, we spoke a couple of weeks ago, Niall, about the whole retention of employees and stuff, and obviously this is used as a tool for retentions. You really need to look at your reason for it. So why is it that you can't accommodate the remote working? Is it the type of job that they do, that it can't be done from home? Is it that you need your team working together, so that they need to be able to share information and it needs to be done on a face-to-face basis? So they're the things that you really need to look at and really think about, okay, well, why can't we accommodate this? What's the impact on the business? And how can I ensure that it's a strong enough reason that if there's a claim against me, I'd be able to stand over it? I think there's going to be loads of different reasons why it's not going to work for people. But that will be business dependent and definitely on a case-by-case basis. But you need to start thinking about that now. But you can refuse it. And I think that is the important thing to note as well.
And as of yet, there's no set procedure to follow in legislation, similar to the chat we had the other week about redundancy. There's no absolute formula you need to follow. It's still just kind of on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, like it's on a case-by-case basis. However, those timelines are there. So those timelines are set out in relation to how and when you do and when you need to report it and respond back to the employee. So that's really important, but there's no formal structure. But with the code coming out next week, there's a possibility there may be some sort of structure. When this legislation was originally floated, there was 13 exceptions. They were removed when it came back into an act last year. So we're kind of waiting to see when it went to public consultation what that will look like as well.
Yeah, but again, as we touched on, this will be keep shifting and changing in the coming weeks and months. Yeah. Another one here. I have people working from home since the pandemic, and I don't have anything in place. Is that okay? I think you might have even covered that one, that I would heavily recommend, regardless of the legislation coming in, that's a legal requirement, heavily recommend getting policies in place.
Yeah, so definitely get policies in place, do risk assessments, all that sort of stuff needs to be done. Like one of my biggest concerns there is that it's probably going on 3 years now, thereabouts 4 years, that are you creating a customer practice? So trying to get the back into work, the contract, that sort of thing should be reviewed, and some perimeters be put around it. Seems quite specific, so we probably need to look at that on a case-by-case basis, but definitely there could be risk associated with that.
Yeah, and we have time for one more here. What if my staff member is injured in their home? Am I liable? Speaking of specific, that sounds like someone might have even had an incident, unfortunately, there
Yeah,
um,
I
surrounding
think
this.
I think a few things. It comes back to my point that the workplace, that remote working is an extension of the workplace.
Of course.
So simply put, yeah, it could possibly be a claim that the employee could put against the employer. From an Irish perspective, we haven't seen any specific cases. There was one German case last year where the employer was found to be at fault, where an employee fell over cable or something like that. So normally what you'll see is if there's a precedent somewhere within Europe, it could be used here. What you may find is that there has been cases already, but they may be settled before they got to the public arena. But ultimately, the fact that as an extension of the workplace, then it could be liability sit with the employer if it was a case that there was an accident at home.
That case paid out fairly sizable amount, if I remember. Is it 50
Yeah,
grand, 60 grand?
yeah, thereabouts. Yeah, quite a lot of spondulics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
And again, for something that people kind of might not consider bringing the health and safety element into the the home, as I think the key word here seems to be extension of the workplace, and then
yeah,
doubling up those policies that you
yeah.
have.
And the thing is, just before we finish up, really important that regardless of what the policy is, it applies everywhere. So, one of the things that we've definitely seen an increase in is team chats. So people chat with people on Teams. We've had a lot of grievances in relation to comments, in relation to kind of sexual harassment, bullying, those type of comments. So that is important that that's monitored. So is there appropriate conduct happening through different chat groups, etc. That definitely has been an increase in that arena as well. So they're the other type of things that you need to be watching out for as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It opens up a whole load of different avenues. Right, everyone. So we're just over time there. I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us. We have 2 more webinars coming up next week in the same slots as usual. And there will be links posted into the chat there. So if you guys would like to register for any of these webinars, the links are in the chat. So on Wednesday, the 31st of January at 11 a.m., we have the Small Business Essential Guide to Workplace Productivity. I think we've touched on a few times here, employment law and HR isn't all about, putting in things to avoid risk to the business and protect the employer. It's at the end of the day, it's also, to help the business run smoothly. And at the end of the day, that's what most people are in business for, trying to get the most out of it. And then on Wednesday, the 7th of February, we'll be taking a little break. Apologies, it won't be one next Thursday, but we're taking a little break. And then when we come back from the long weekend, on Wednesday, the 7th of February at 11 a.m., absence management and what you need to know. That's again been a huge issue for a lot of our clients calling in, especially after the Christmas period and into January now. It's this 100-day cough that's going around and different flus and bugs and everything like that. Really seen a lot of clients taking a hit in terms of staff calling in sick and even long-term sick. So how best practice around managing that, and again linking into the productivity from next week's webinar. Lovely stuff. Well, thank you very much everyone for joining us here today. Thank you, Moira, once again for joining me. Lovely, and have a great day everyone. Hopefully we'll see you in the coming weeks.
Thank you.